Hello and welcome to this, our second Open Research Week 2022 event, assessing, monitoring and rewarding open research and the funder's role. You're very welcome to keep your camera on, but please mute yourself throughout the session. You can enable closed captions for this session by clicking on the three dots at the top of the screen and clicking Turn on Live Captions. We'll be keeping an eye on the chat. Please feel free to put any questions there. We'll be taking questions at the end from the chat, and if we need any further clarification, we may ask you to unmute and ask the question yourself. This session is being recorded and the recording will be available at the beginning of March. The Open Research team is committed to providing a friendly, respectful and welcoming environment for all and to ensure a harassment-free experience for everyone. We request that all participants be treated with dignity and respect. So, without further ado, I am delighted to introduce Aki Macfarlane from the Wellcome Trust. Aki is an open research specialist in the research environment team at the Wellcome Trust, and she's here to talk about the Trust's role in helping to promote and embed open research practices within the UK. Over to you, Aki.
Thank you, and thank you, Judith, and thank you everyone for joining. It's lovely to see you all. For anyone who might need it, just a quick audio description of me. I'm a mixed race woman with shoulder length dark hair, sitting in a room with white walls and what I consider to be tasteful exposed brickwork. And while you ponder your opinions on that, I will attempt sharing my screen. All right, so my talk, as advertised, titled Assessing, Monitoring and Rewarding Open Research and the Funder's Role. And I'm, as Judith introduced, Open Research Specialist at Wellcome within the Research Environment team, which I will speak a little bit more about later on. So today's session, I'm going to start with a bit of a dissection of what do I mean by open research, and then cover sort of at what points do funders assess open research in sort of the life cycle of a research grant or project, cover how Wellcome monitors openness in its funded research, and then a bit more discussion hopefully about how Wellcome rewards openness and what more could we do. So the title is, yes, about funders and openness. I will obviously be approaching this from a Wellcome lens, and I'll try where possible to point out where I think there's something that Wellcome specifically does, but other funders may operate differently, but do try and be aware that I'm obviously coming at this from a singular perspective. Do feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. I can't see it right now, but I'll definitely have a look back and see who was here. And I love to hear kind of your ideas and experiences as well. And if you're asking a question, especially please do introduce yourself, because it's really helpful to know kind of what context the question is coming from. So don't be shy. So open research. Or open science, open access, you might be thinking, oh, are these all sort of the same thing? And I just wanted to lay down what I mean when I say open research. Obviously, people have different definitions. And I've drawn out this slightly sketchy Venn diagram here, which no one has ever told me is incorrect, so I'm just going to roll with it, where I just try and draw out that open research to me is not just open science. It includes other forms of research, which could be in the arts or humanities or social sciences, which are other areas covered by Wellcome. But obviously there's a lot of other non-health research as well. And just a recognition here that basically research doesn't, science doesn't operate in a vacuum. There's lots of other types of research, and we can both kind of learn from and give experiences to other fields as well. And a lot of people just assume open research is only open access publishing, and I would like to say I don't agree with that sentiment. And I was interested to hear from the audience, what does open mean to you in the context of research? And I'm now going to try and shift window to Minty, if I can. And hopefully you'll be able to see the code there. And I would love for as many of you as possible just to throw out off the top of your head, what's your first feeling when you think, what does open research mean? Lovely, I can see some boxes popping up, so it means the system's working, which is good news. I'm seeing lots of comments on transparency, equity, cost, so no financial barriers. I am not sure if I can scroll, I can scroll down on this page. Lots more transparency, accessibility, sharing, equity, mentions of data. This is lovely. So do feel free to keep adding these, but I'm going to flip back, if I can, to my PowerPoint and give you my take. So I do agree with lots of people who said openly accessible by anyone who needs it. And within that, I think I sort of in my head included those points about cost and accessibility in there. But for me, I think it's also important to think about broader meanings of the word open. And for me, it's also sort of sharing things with a kind of unconcealed, unobfuscated, frank, candid manner that welcomes scrutiny and critique and is receptive to new ideas, interpretations and improvements, ideally. Because I feel that, openness should be done to lead to the greatest possible benefit to the public. And for welcome research, we usually say to human health. And then another sort of common theme that people often bring up is openness or open access publishing in particular being done quickly, and so therefore there's the quickest possible benefit. And I'm not necessarily on board with the idea that that's the most important thing. I think the important thing is the quality. I think, the more we share the way we carry out research and the results that we've got, and we open up those results to other minds, the more we can improve each other's and our own work. And I think for me, there's obviously the sort of selfless side of wanting to benefit the public or the world or whoever or whatever the beneficiaries of your research are. But there has to be a selfish element where you find some way that practicing openness has benefited you yourself, whether it's improved the work you've done or it's improved your reputation or something like that. I think it can't all be done altruistically, and we have to find ways that openness is good for all the parties involved in order for it to work well. At Wellcome, I mentioned earlier, we have a research environment team newly formed with the aim of ensuring that Wellcome-funded research is open, engaged, equitable and efficient. In the open research strand that I work in, we work across the organisation on a number of issues, including our data, software, materials, clinical trials data, sharing, obviously some open access publishing work, and also providing the right incentives and recognition for researchers to make their research open, and also recognising that Wellcome doesn't exist alone in the system. We work with other parties, funders, publishers, institutions, and researchers themselves as necessary. And just a note here, I've mentioned the sort of things that Wellcome's historically focused on, but there's obviously lots of other types of openness in research through the whole research enterprise. So standards, citations, lab notebooks, protocols. I have mentioned preprints, open peer review, and there's lots of other things I'm sure I haven't mentioned here as well. Just to note that we are aware of all these aspects. It's maybe not something we've focused on in the past. I think I've sort of covered why we do this as well, but you know, as funders, we want the research we fund to be open and accessible to have the greatest possible impact. And also we believe being able to share all of the insights from a piece of research means we can reduce research waste. And by this, I'm talking about sort of your null and negative results. You know, you try an experiment, nothing really came of it, and you think, oh, nobody's really interested in that. But actually someone who's also thinking of doing the same experiment might be interested in knowing what you didn't find, for example. And we also believe that openness supports reproducibility of research. It's not the only factor in that story, of course. And I am definitely aware openness does not come without problems. So, of course, making outputs open can be time intensive and resource intensive. And this is especially true if you're really trying to make it usable to other people. It's something that has to be built in right from the beginning of your project and can be really problematic if it's something you haven't, you know, thought about at the beginning and you get to the end of your project and need to share something but you can't remember what all your notes said, for example. And often, though not always, openness, especially in terms of journal publications, can mean the author paying instead of the reader, which is supposed to remove some inequity, but introduces other inequities. For example, non-funded research, where the researcher might have to stump up the cash themselves. And while funders are bringing in mandates for openness, I'm well aware, Wellcome is one of those, they need to be supported by the system that any mandate is applied to. And I think, you know, that's a tricky, really tricky thing because, you know, you need to shift the system in some way, but how can you bring in a kind of a disruption like that in a way that doesn't again introduce more inequity? It's very difficult. And one part of this kind of big systemic problem that I saw illustrated quite nicely on social media recently in the last few weeks, which some of you may have seen. I apologise if you have, but it's only a couple of minutes, but I enjoyed it, so I wanted to share with you here. I would like to note, I'm not here to bash publishers. That just happens to be the theme of this very topical video that I saw recently.
I'm sorry, but we can't hear him.
I think, Aki, if you click on the share contents thing again, and then there a little, in the top right corner, it will say include computer sound, and then we should then be able to hear it, I think.
Excellent. I did not know that.
And I only remembered it right when you started the video.
Would you like me to go back to the beginning, or have you been able to follow the captions? Let's go back to the beginning. We're only 30 seconds.
Yeah, let's go back. Well, it's still not working.
I clicked the wrong button.
Making some of our articles open.
Brilliant.
Access. That's a good idea. Make the articles free to the public so that anybody can appreciate the latest scientific advancements. I like it. Of course, the author would have to pay some kind of publishing fee. Yeah, okay, that's reasonable. What, like a couple $100? Yeah, I was thinking maybe $11,000. What? Yeah, $11,000, and we put your article on our website for anybody to read. Why so much? Oh, you know, all the costs. What costs? Reviewing the article? Yeah, we don't pay reviewers. We guilt them into it because it's good for science. Okay, what about formatting? Your 12-year-old niece does that for us. Well, we gotta publish it. That costs money. It's a PDF on a website. Kaylee does it in like 2 seconds. Kaylee? Your niece. Oh, yeah. Besides, who's gonna be able to afford this? Oh, people will pay. Why? Because they have to. What do you mean? Researchers have to publish in order to keep their jobs or get promoted, and we're one of the most prestigious journals around. People will pay. So it's extortion. Here at Nature, we're doing crime. Oh, Christopher, don't be so dramatic. So let me get this straight. You want to charge researchers $11,000 to publish an open access article, thereby ensuring that only researchers with the most money get to publish an article, which defeats the purpose of having open access articles in the first place. Yeah, that's right. And this is guaranteed to be profitable because researchers' livelihoods are dependent on a predatory system that values publishing in high-impact journals. Hey, you got it. This, of course, is insane. It's academics, baby.
So, obviously, this is a satirical piece, and I'm certainly not suggesting that Nature employs child labour, but certainly it's a thought-provoking little skit there, and it does highlight that much-discussed issue of high-impact journal publications being viewed as essential for career progression. And valuing open access clearly doesn't remove this issue. It's often sort of brought up in partnership as a related issue. But we do hope to help move away from this kind of problem by showing, I say we, I'm talking funders here, we do hope to help move away from this by showing that we value a variety of research outputs and not just saying articles from any venue, but outputs of all different types have value. And so this leads me into a bit of a discussion about funders' assessment of openness. Wellcome, of course, is a signatory to DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment, which works to promote the value of all scholarly outputs, as I just mentioned, asserting that the focus of the assessment should be on the intrinsic merit of the work rather than the venue of publication. There are many points through a research project at which openness could be assessed. This is a nice flow diagram, I guess, from Dublin City University, showing various stages in a research project, which, you know, could be cut up in many different ways. But here, I thought they quite nicely laid out a few key points at which assessments are made. So funders specifically, I think, have a really obviously massive role in the part of the process where you apply for funding. But also post-award, funders have a responsibility to check that what was required of their researchers was actually carried out as well. So sort of pre-award, at the point of applying for a grant, we ask at Wellcome, we ask for evidence of a researcher's past openness and plans for openness or not of the research proposed. So we do allow for intellectual property if that is the most appropriate route for that particular project as well. And yeah, so the evidence of past openness will be described by the applicant in the application form, and our Wellcome staff check for any previous Wellcome funded publications by the applicant, and if those have not been made open access as per our open access policy, that is rectified before and the next award is given. And the outputs management plan, which should contain plans for opening up as much of research as appropriate, that plan is assessed by reviewers of the grant application and flagged to staff if necessary. Post-award, we assessed to what extent the research was made open. Grantees self-report annually and at the end of grant. And we do also have some sort of programmatic monitoring, as I mentioned, that end of grant reporting by grantees that can be cross-checked against the various databases. We can pull out any peer-reviewed publications from the literature that quote Wellcome funding, and we run our own stats internally on those, and do publish those regularly as well. The stats, I mean. We also receive reports from institutions that receive block funding for open access publications, and so we can do a little bit of reporting from there as well. Rewarding, I always think, is probably the most interesting part of this cycle in terms of what the funders could do, and probably something we don't focus on as much as we could. So I am certainly all ears in this section, but I'm going to talk a little bit first. We have at Wellcome in the past and in the future dedicated funding specifically to advancing or encouraging, at the very least, openness. We did run the Open Research Fund, which was a specific funding scheme giving small pilot grants to people who want to kind of revolutionize a certain area of research with openness. We ran some data reuse prizes back in 2018, and there is a related Wellcome Data Prize coming soon. That one focusing on mental health. So if you happen to work in the mental health field and have any ideas about data, do check that out, because I think that is going to be a really exciting piece of work. And I guess a part of rewarding openness is, do we, Wellcome, give grants to people based on how open they have been in the past? It's an eternal question in this kind of forum. And I can tell you we have recently changed our application forms. So you may have seen this if you've been perusing our application forms recently, or you may not have. We're now using the Resume for Researchers format developed partly by the Royal Society. And so now, rather than asking for just kind of lists of past work, we ask for a narrative based on these 3 questions here. So how an applicant has contributed to the generation of knowledge. This is an obvious one to flag open research in. How you contributed to the development of others, which is a question more for senior applicants, but you could certainly bring in at this point whether you have encouraged your staff or junior researchers to be more open, and how you contributed to the wider research community, which again could be inspiring further openness, for example. And obviously this combines in a lot of other aspects of research. So you could bring up any work you have done on research culture, diversity and inclusion, many other factors, as well as the generation of ideas in your particular area of research as well. And we still ask applicants to complete an outputs management plan for the research they're proposing. And when looking at the forms that come in, we really want to see evidence that applicants recognise the value of openness in research, and we want to see that they've assessed the potential value of the outputs of their research and have considered how to maximise this value in the most appropriate fashion, how to store and manage these outputs, and how to ensure that they're accessible and reusable. Often here, I debate whether to put how to ensure the outputs abide by the FAIR principles: findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But I personally think that accessible and reusable are the ones that the researcher themselves has the most control over, and that, so for me personally, those are the ones that I want to see. There's all kinds of discussion, I'm sure, could come out of that bold statement, but I would also like to add at this point, I often get asked in this kind of discussion, well, surely, you know, you as the funder, you can just, you know, do whatever you want. And I just wanted to just bring up, our funding decisions are taken based on the recommendations of researchers, yourselves. So we all need to work together on this, and we, you know, we all have a part to play in this very complex system. But I recognise here that there's more that funders and Wellcome can do to reward openness in research. And I think particularly what's lacking is celebration of good practice, personally. So that's definitely something on my agenda. But I am, again, interested to hear your thoughts. I'm going to skip back over to Menti. And we've been here about half an hour. There isn't a lot more to my talk after this section, but I thought I will, this is quite a bigger question, so I'll try and give a couple of minutes for people to think about and actually type out their answer. So I will attempt to play a bit of royalty-free background music and invite anyone who has either finished writing their answer or doesn't want to write an answer to have a quick comfort break or have a stretch. I'm going to do a stretch and probably loosen up my shoulders a little bit, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes.
I just ask, has everybody got the next slide on the Menti? Yeah, they must have done, because I haven't. That's okay.
All right, that's been about 3 or 4 minutes, I think, and I see lots of interesting suggestions here. I would love to be able to go through and discuss all of them, but I think I will just pick out a few that speak to me initially, but I will definitely take these away and have a look at them. Thank you so much for all of these. Case studies of what good practice looks like on funder websites, I think, is an excellent idea. We do on the Wellcome website have a few examples of what we consider good outputs management plans, but actual good practice, not so much. So that's certainly something I'm interested in. And if you're not open, you don't get funding, is a nice bold stance. I'm not sure we're quite there yet at Wellcome. An interesting question, if openness should be rewarded by funders or should it be an expectation? I think that's a really thoughtful point. I would love if it were just an expectation and not notable. But I think really well practiced openness is unfortunately still quite notable. And yeah, lots of suggestions of funding costs, which I did briefly see as a question in the chat about, so let's pick that up in Q&A later. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for those suggestions. As I said, I will certainly go back and have a look at those later, and I'm sure, I believe you can all still, I'm not sure if you can go in and look at other people's answers, but I'm happy to share them somehow later if not. And I will just quickly finish up my presentation, if I can find it, which is not long at all, and then leave you all plenty of space to ask questions and give your views. Yeah, so picking up from my point about who is doing assessment when we talk about funders making assessments, and I mentioned that, you know, some among the audience might be reviewers or committee members for Wellcome or other funders, but even those of you who aren't in those roles, it's all about culture. I really think open research is at the heart a culture issue, and sure there's training and resource missing in a lot of areas, but those issues are not necessarily insurmountable if the, I don't say political will, but, you know, if the will is there, and you can help with that by, you know, talking to your peers, supervisors, institutions, publishers, learned societies you might be a member of, and funders, talking about openness to all of these parties and other players in the research ecosystem, talking both about the benefits of openness, but also, and I think really crucially, talking about the challenges and the risks, being open about those as well, and how we can work together to mitigate those for the greatest societal benefit, if I may be so lofty. And that is really the last thing that I wanted to say, that we're kind of all in this together, and even though we all see different benefits and challenges, and it helps if we all talk to each other a little bit more, and that's certainly something that I think funders could do better. More dialogue with researchers and other actors in the system. So it's not all on you, that's what I'm saying. And yes, thank you very much for joining today. Thanks for bearing with slight technical wranglings. But again, I'm very happy to hear your questions, ideas, experiences. My email address is here on the slide if you want to jot it down, or I believe the slides will be shared around afterwards. If not, I will certainly demand that they are. So yes, that is all I wanted to say today. And we have a little bit of space now for discussion, for which I believe I'm handing over to Liam.
Thank you, Aki. Yes. So what I'll do is I'll start out by, well, thank you very much. First of all, it was a really great talk, by the way, and really fascinating to get from the perspective. I'll start us off with a couple of the questions that came during the chat, and that can give everyone a bit of time to be thinking about one or two themselves, and I might even squeeze one for myself in there as well. It was really interesting you said about the Wellcome Data Reuse Prize, by the way. It made me think that maybe we could have had someone who won that in our Open Research Winners session on Thursday. But yeah, maybe next year. So what I'll do now is I'll just sort of start with a couple that came in the chat earlier on. So quite a bit earlier, Nicola Pugh said, do you have any thoughts about open peer review from the fund's perspective?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. There's obviously various different types of peer review. There's within journal articles, and at Wellcome, you may know we have a publishing platform called Wellcome Open Research, which I think is open access, but also peer review is carried out in the open on that platform. So, and we found that it's interesting. It definitely at the beginning of that platform's life, it was certainly not new move, but an interesting move, and people were worried that it was going to take a really long time to find people willing to review an article openly. I don't have any stats to hand on me with the on that one, I'm afraid, but we've certainly had a lot of positive feedback from reviewers and researchers submitting to that system about doing that openly. So it is possible, and some people like it, some people won't like it. That's a disruptive innovation for you. And of course, another peer review comes in the grant funding process. And I think it's safe to say the idea of doing that peer review openly is some way off in the future. For the Open Research Fund, we did publish, for anyone who consented, we published submissions, so not just the funded applications, but submissions along with a very abridged summary of why it was or was not funded, which we hoped people would find useful. And I have noted in recent weeks the Dutch, I'm not going to be able to remember what it stands for, the Dutch funder NWO have started a similar endeavour. So they have their own Open Research Fund, and there I have to say they have gone above and beyond and really put a really clear, thoughtful review comments out with each submission. So I'm really glad to see that idea being taken on by others and performed really nicely. So I think it'll be interesting to see developments in that area. I think it's a little bit early to know how that's going that from that angle. But yeah, I think it's really interesting when you're asking people not to just open up kind of factual things, but also open their opinions. It's a really different thing to ask. So
that's great, thank you. The second one that came in earlier on was by Hilary, and Hilary was saying, will Wellcome allow additional administrative support on grants to support the work of formatting and uploading larger data sets, for example?
So it has been the case for a number of years that you can, as a part of the grant budget, request those costs. I will say I don't find it particularly clearly signposted on the website or in the application forms, but that has been possible for a number of years. But there is definitely still an open question there about, you know, does that disadvantage a field or a project where perhaps those costs would be really high? And that, to be honest, is just not something we have addressed yet. And if it's something that affects you or holds you back, please talk to us, and it's something that we can take further. But I'm not aware, word hasn't reached me of objections about that. But if you have objections, please voice them so we can do something about them.
Lovely, thanks. Okay, more recent ones now. And if anybody wants to raise their hand and actually say this verbally, you're welcome to do so. But the next one was by Dr. Emma Henderson, who asks, why was the Open Research Fund closed? And does Wellcome have plans to bring something similar back?
This is quite a boring answer, to be honest. We first pitched the scheme as a 3-year scheme with the view of looking back over the 3 years and making a decision at that point what to do. And as we reached the 3rd year of the Open Research Fund, Wellcome overhauled all of its funding schemes and closed everything that existed, and now only has 3 funding schemes. So there just wasn't really an option to continue it. But, it's the sort of thing that we now likely won't do through an open response mode grant funding call. But it's not that we don't want to support this sort of thing, but we might do it in different ways. We might use a delivery partner, or still up in the air, I'm afraid.
Gotcha. No, that makes sense. Yeah, when I saw it, I thought maybe it's just going to kickstart things and then you review it and it might come back in a different form. So I see what you mean. Next person was Dan Crane. Dan, I saw you sharing your camera earlier on. Would you like to ask your question verbally, or shall I read it out?
No, hi there. Yeah, no, I'm happy to read it out. Hi, Aki. Thanks very much for that. So yeah, as the question says, I work at King's College London in the library supporting data management. And my question was, in how much detail is data sharing monitored? And thinking both in terms of the open access policy, which says there should be a data statement, but also in the detail of the data policy itself. So is it looking to say that a statement has been made about the data, and then at what level of actual sharing and where and how is that, basically in how much detail do you look at?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's something that we don't look at, I think, as deeply as I would like, but there are obviously a lot of different aspects to our outputs management and sharing policy, and the data sharing only being a part of that, and then within that, the data availability statement only being a part of that. And I think to some extent we hope that the presence and content of data availability statement is something the publisher should take some ownership of and have and chase up, as it were. The actual data sharing itself is something that we do monitor, but with a sort of a dipstick approach. So we just can't look for all of the data outputs of everyone, because there isn't such a good infrastructure as with publications, where you can just essentially search PubMed or get a subscription to Dimensions. It's not as easy to capture where data has been. It's very difficult to capture, I should say, where data has not been shared when it should have, and so there's not the same denominator there. So it's a lot more difficult, but it's something we've looked at by going through under grant reports, and sometimes where possible cross-referencing with an outputs management plan. But actually, a lot of the grants that end at the moment began before we required outputs management plans. So we're not quite there yet, but that's the dream, is to ensure that what was planned was carried out, and if not, why not? There may be a reasonable explanation. But yes, we're sort of waiting on both the clock a little bit and some easier programmatic way to look at things.
Thanks very much.
Great. Okay. Emma Ganley was next. Emma, if you're around, would you like to take the mic, or shall I read it out?
Sure, I can
hope that's working. Hi, Aki, thanks for the nice presentation. So huge disclaimer, I work at Protocols.io, but really interested in knowing if Wellcome might consider some kind of more encouragement or stronger encouragement that researchers do a better job of sharing the methods that they've used to generate the data. We've come amazingly long way for data sharing and for open access to papers, but sadly, what's in the papers often isn't actually enough to reproduce the research, and there are tools that can help that. Protocols.io is one. It's not the only one by any means, and people can independently publish the methods, but I think it's really helpful when funders kind of put that message to the researchers and make it clear that that's the expectation as well. There certainly are other funders that do that, so I'd love to know Wellcome's thoughts. Thank you.
100%. I completely agree with that. It's something that I think, as you alluded to, is vaguely encouraged in our outputs management sharing policy, which was put together a few years ago. Honestly, at a time where really improving actual data sharing was really crucial, and that was what was focused on then. Certainly, it's always possible for us to review our policies. But the reality of it is a sort of policy which, puts requirements on the researcher is something that has to go through a lot of internal process. So it's not as simple as tweaking the wording on that web page. There's an awful lot of approvals that go into the exact words and the exact level of encouragement or mandate or not in the policy. So rest assured, it is definitely something that we care about and want to champion more. And I do think that we are getting to a stage where sharing results themselves doesn't need quite as much fanfare, and that sharing the other outputs throughout the research lifecycle is something that we could put a say stronger lens, but that sounds not quite right. I don't know, a higher magnification on going forward. So I'd like to say watch this space, but I can't give you any timeline.
Thanks, Aki. Okay, we've got Wolfgang next. Wolfgang, are you around?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so much for your presentation. I would like to ask you about whether you see any possibilities for what could be seen as a participatory process between researchers and funders, or Wellcome or others, during the research project process. And this could be maybe seen in some ways as a kind of mentoring, but not to control the process, but to be in an interactive, ongoing exchange during which a reflective process on openness, on practices, etc., could arise, and knowledge can be shared between researchers and funders in a participatory way that then even maybe later on other research projects could benefit and so on. And this could happen in different stages at the research process, like even before an application or during a project or at the end, depending on how it makes sense. Do you have any thoughts on this? Thank you.
Absolutely. I think that's definitely a sort of, the ethos there is a direction we definitely would like to move in, like more of a discussion, a dialogue, as you were saying, and sharing experiences from both ends. I certainly want to say I don't have all the answers of the best way to do openness in every field of research that Wellcome supports. Despite my job title, I cannot be a specialist in all of those, and I want to recognise that. But there's also, I think, a question a little bit of resource. I'm not sure that it's something that's practical, feasible to do for every proposal or even every funded grant that comes in, but perhaps some sort of workshops or coming together of applicants or grantees could be really helpful. We'll put that on the list if you have not already put it on one of the lists or in the chat. I had another thought, but it's gone. I'll bring it up if it comes back.
Great. Okay, so we have one last question. That's Carve. And by the way, thanks, Carve, for doing all the great stuff in the chat and answering the questions. Been really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Aki, and everyone else. Very informative. Yeah, I'm the guy who put on the big mouth who said, no, if your data is not open, then you don't get funding. But I'm seriously interested. I'm probably missing something. Under what circumstances, if I want funding from Wellcome, would I say, yeah, I've got the data, I'm not going to open it, but give me the money? Where is that? What is that decision? Is it the policy or a technical point?
I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch the end of your question there.
Okay, is it why, under what circumstances would you say, yes, you can have the funding, but we agree that you do not open your data, even if you have it, or you don't publish open access? Why can't Wellcome say, sorry, everything has to be open? And I'm sorry if it's not clear, we can just end it here.
I think I see what you're saying. I think, honestly, if we received a proposal that said, we're going to produce this data that has obvious benefit to humanity, but we're never going to share it, that would not fly. Absolutely not. I think what can happen is that people come through and say, yes, of course I'm going to share it, and then down the road don't. And that's, I think, where it's really difficult. I don't think there's anyone that comes in and says, we're not going to share it, because Wellcome has a very strong stance of, you absolutely must.
Okay, so it's people not actually going through or fulfilling the promise, that's mainly the problem, and not opening things up, having said they would.
My feeling from what I see is that the overwhelming majority of people do. There's not a huge hidden data problem, as it were, but the issue often is people not sharing it in the most maximally useful way, or with appropriate documentation, or sometimes it's researchers thinking, oh, if I just put a statement somewhere that says, oh, you can ask me for this, and then I leave my email address, but then I move institution and I've not updated that email address on that old publication, and then the trail could have run cold. I think that's the sort of issue we're coming up against, really, more than people having a moral objection. That I'm sure those people do exist, but we don't often see them at Wellcome.
Good news. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much. I will now wrap things up since we're out of time. So in Open Research Week, we're a small team. We couldn't have done this without the fantastic support and generosity of Aki, who's joined us today. And so thank you for sharing your time and your expertise. It's been great. Thanks to Wellcome Trust, who employ you, who have also generously awarded the Institutional Strategic Support Fund to the Faculty of Health and Life and Sciences at the University of Liverpool. And that's really helped to support this week. So shortly after this session, you'll receive a link to a feedback survey. Please share with us what we could do better as a team, what you've enjoyed, what you'd like to see next year. And as you know, we've recorded the session, so you'll receive a link to the recording in early March. This was the second session of Open Research Week. Tomorrow we've got open journals, possibilities in publishing, and also making open education fair, principles, practice, and the National Teaching Repository, which is I'm co-presenting that one. There's other open research and open science events happening throughout the year. We'd recommend the Open Research Calendar. And then just to quickly mention that on the 15th of March, we have another event hosted by Research Know-How at the University of Liverpool, who will have Joy Owango, who is one of the founding members of Africa Archive. And then in April, there's also Open Scholarship Week, which we want to plug, and that's happening at the National University of Ireland in Galway. So look out for their programme coming out soon. So just remains for me to say thanks again, Aki, you've been wonderful, and thank you everyone for joining the session.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.